Alright, so this week I'm going to be going over some stuff about how to sort of make your own custom textures, do a little bit of sort of perhaps fine-tuning on these internet textures. Specifically for stuff like Scratches, I see a lot of times people, they'll Google Scratch texture, find something like this, and these I think are a really good starting point, but they're not usually something that you just want to apply straight to the model unless you're just sort of testing things. So I've gone and I've downloaded this one. And just for an example, I'm going to throw this on two different objects. So one of them is just a regular sphere on the left, and then, oh, also I have key inputs, so that's hopefully being a thing, which is exciting. Had to watch a video in Russian to figure that out, and I do not know Russian. So, but yeah, so one is just a regular sphere. This one is a quad ball, and honestly I was hoping this would look a little bit worse than it did. But you will notice certain areas around here where there's some UV seams, it gets a little weird. If we go down around to the back of the sphere, like this is not ideal. And then even like up in here you get like some weird pulling and stuff. So yeah, and it's just not great for doing targeted scratches. The other thing, just like weird bonus tip, this texture is clearly very low res for what I need. So there's sort of different ways you can approach that. One is just make your own textures that are actually high res. The other would be to go into your file node and the place 2D texture here, and you can just turn the repeat U and V up. What this is going to do, it literally is going to duplicate the texture on the U and the V. Effectively what it does is it shrinks the texture a little bit, but also since it's effectively tiling it, it's not making the image higher res, but it's using the resolution of the image over a smaller area, so it appears to be higher res in the renders. The downside of that is if you don't want your texture to be smaller, it's going to make your texture smaller. Also, the more you tile it, the more it runs the risk of adding random seams into your UVs. There's actually a kind of noticeable one. When I duplicated it twice, it just threw a seam like right down the center of this, which is not ideal. So something to be aware of, but it is good if you just sort of have like a thing, like a sort of background texture you might need a little higher res, or if your texture actually tiles and your UV supports a tiling texture, it makes a lot of sense. So what I'm going to show you right now is basically how to go in, and we'll start with just sort of modifying a where am I going? Modifying a internet scratch texture. Not so much to make it higher res, but maybe to pull out some scratches. Like I'm kind of really into this scratch right here, but the rest of them are kind of like, I don't want all these like weird speckly things. So this is a good way to, if you have a texture that you like, you can just go through and sort of pull it out of an existing texture. Just make sure that the file licensing type makes sense. And for the record, so I just threw in a new layer in Photoshop, and I'm literally just sort of sloppily painting out the rest of these. I'm also going to be doing all of this without a tablet, because my tablet's being weird right now. So if you have a tablet, pretty much everything I'm showing you is probably going to be a little bit easier. But, there we are. So what I've done is basically just gone through and like traced out the areas around this texture. And then I would just go in, if I cared enough, and crop this image. What am I doing? It's been a hot minute since I've actually like done Photoshop stuff for real. What am I doing? And I'll just basically like cut this out of a square. It doesn't super matter, like honestly I could just sort of crop everything white out of this image. I'm just going to crop this down a little bit to make it kind of easier to see and work with. I'll go ahead and just merge these layers using destructive Photoshop techniques because frankly I don't super care about this. I'm not going to come back and ever edit this. And then I'm just going to select the entire background and delete it. Sure. Gotta love content aware. Nope. I forgot about content aware fill. What have I done? Yes, because it's the background. Oof. Haha. Duplicate the layer. Great. Alright, so theoretically, if we delete that, then we should have this lovely image over a PNG. So what you can do with this is just save it out, make sure it has transparency, and then throw it into any other texture that you're working with to be able to get that texture pulled correctly. And just for grins, I will make this background some type of absolutely horrendous, sure, red color. I never use the gradient tool. Why is that open? And you can see this is like a little bit sloppy. It's not a super great clean pull. There's like some white areas in it. So you'd also usually want to go through and clean that up. The sort of cheapest way to do this is just grab the levels and just crush it aggressively down. You could also go in, and honestly that's usually what I do for something like this. You also do ideally want to make sure that this is a slightly higher resolution. You could throw this, if you really cared, into Illustrator and do the vector tracing on this and then export it as a vector and bring that in and size it to whatever you need. There's like also free software online that'll do that as well, and like 1,000,000,001 tutorials, but this is what I'd usually do for something like this. And you know what, I'm actually just gonna go ahead and save this, because what the heck. Scratch my transp. And I will save, why am I working in my downloads folder? Ugh. Regrets. Alright, probably shouldn't have put an exclamation there, but here we go. Let's live on the edge, guys. Alright, so I'll save that. The other thing that sometimes I do, if I maybe wanted this to be, this feels like a really deep scratch to me, if I wanted this to be some kind of like bump map or something like that, with where it gets like deeper inside, this is my really cheap, stupid way to do this without spending a lot of time on this. I make no promises that this is at all the best way to do things. Wait, why am I adding a color overlay? But what I'm going to do is add a inner glow to this. And, come on. Oh my god. Go in, just set that to normal, set the opacity to be 100. And what I want to do is set this to be 50% gray. 50% gray on a bump map is do nothing. Don't make any raised areas, don't make any lower areas, just exist. So what I'm going to do, when you set this to 50% gray, basically it's saying don't really do anything around the edges, but this inside area is going to be darker. So what you could do is actually, if you wanted to, you could maybe set this to like 40... I want this lowered, so I want maybe 60% gray. Oh, sorry, no, 40%. 40% brightness, which is darker. Having a moment. And then that'll make like a sad little scratch, basically. And then at that point you can mess with, you know, the size. So I usually take that down, and then that looks terrible. Play around with this until you get something that you're sort of happy with in terms of feathering, right? So I mean, this is like a few really deep areas and then like a less aggressively deep area right there. So that's, I'm just gonna say, fairly acceptable in the land of Crazy Allison. And then what I'm gonna do is come through with a 50%, and you could do two things. You could save this out with transparency again, or you can turn this into an actual texture map, and both honestly have their uses. So this is, if I apply a 50% gray background, basically this is now just a giant bump map with a massive scratch on it. So I'm just gonna sort of duplicate this scratch a few times, because I don't care what this looks like, I just want it to show up in Maya. So what I'm going to do is save this as a PNG Scratch my bump test. So this is honestly like kind of the basis of all my scratches. I usually just start with like a weird black and white image, and then I run in and I'm like, hey, what if I do something really crazy to this and just like throw in... Wow, I forgot that on a Lambert, bump mapping is just right up with the rest of everything, and I was like, where is my bump map? So I'm just using, for the record, I am using Lamberts for test purposes. Don't actually use these to render stuff if you're doing like Arnold Redshift. You have real software, use the nice real software. I'm just using this to demonstrate the bump map, and ooh lordy, that is low resolution and gross looking. Heck yes. Alright. So this is my hideous scratch that was not meant to be stretched across an entire texture, stretching across an entire texture. But you can see that we do have a bit of nice sort of tapering, where it is sort of getting slightly lower in the center. And this is where I'm gonna just really quick, because this is bothering me with how disgustingly low res it looks. Oof. Oof. Oh, that's not better at all. Ooh, 40? No wonder. I was like, okay. But yeah, so I mean that's the scratch. If you shrink it down, it's still low res, so make sure that your stuff is high resolution when you're doing stuff. But that's usually how I just sort of like pull a particular scratch that I like from a black and white scratch map, and sort of make it a little bit dimensional, kind of in what the heck, in Maya, for bump maps or anything else. But yeah, so that's kind of the basis of scratches. I'll show you maybe some sort of different types of scratches and stuff like that in the next video, and then I'll just show you how to make some, and then go through and maybe how to place them for a little bit more coherent looking look.